Welcome back to KneeToKnee. I'm Mark Merritt. This is a podcast for men who are ready to stop going it alone and start building the connections that actually move the needle in their health, their career, and their relationships. Today, I'm sitting down with Tony Cotrupe. 35 years as an investment banking, he's been in private equity and a business consultant, and he opens every single relationship with his clients with the same words: how can I help? Now, if this conversation hits home with you, make certain to hit the like and subscribe button so you can catch all the episodes that we have coming out. Tony breaks down the difference between business that produces value and one that quietly consumes it. And he explains why driving your company by looking only in the rearview mirror will eventually put you in the ditch. We get into the contract that almost sank a packaging company and the one question Tony asks before anything else. All right, let's get ready and get knee to knee with Tony. Welcome everyone again to another episode of Knee to Knee. I'm really excited to have you here today. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate you coming. Today, I'm pretty excited. We've got all right, this guy's just way cool. I'm just telling you. Tony, but I'm going to be honest with you. How do you say your last name?
It's Cotrupe.
Cotrupe. I was going to guess.
None of them repeat. There you go.
All right, I was going to guess, but I don't want to get that wrong, right? Because, I mean, people look at my last name sometimes and they slaughter it. But, Tony, I'm excited to have you on. And I know that sounds odd to say, how do you say your last name when we're recording? But this is real life, right? This is the way things are. And so,
hey. Yeah.
But Tony, like I say, we appreciate you coming on. Tony is somebody that comes from, as we talked about in the introduction, he's got some amazing business world experience. And so we kind of want to tap into that today as we tie into pillar number 2, which is that career and skills portion. But Tony ties also into not just pillar 2, but pillar 4, which is that mindfulness and relationships kind of thing as well, where it also ties together. So Tony, before we got started, we were talking about kind of where I'd hope to get started today. And so most men, you have actually a very strong relationship, deep relationship with many of your clients. Most men don't have that when it comes to in the business world. What do you see as those things that, number one, that prevents them from doing that? And number 2, what are the advantages to having someone, whether it's like yourself, that comes from the financial sector at times, or whatever sector it is, that they can build that trust and help them with their career?
You know, it starts out, oddly enough, with just a conversation, and I usually begin the conversation with, how can I help? I'm not here to throw a bunch of, solutions du jour at you. I'm here to listen to what it is you want, what your circumstances are, and figure out how I can help. And that may be, one of the arrows in my quiver, so to speak, or it may be somebody that I know that can, bring their skills to bear on whatever the problem, the situation is. And, we all have, well, as you alluded to, multiple sides of ourselves. There's, if you talk about somebody that owns a business, yeah, they own the business and they have a bunch of employees that they have relationships with, but they also have a family and responsibilities and relationships there. And sort of working the two together doesn't always come easy to people. I try to understand sort of the whole picture and then, start asking questions, but a lot of it is just listening, really. Once you get people to, start down the road to tell me what you want, they really do spill their guts quite a bit. And I find out a lot of stuff that maybe, they didn't come into the meeting thinking they would talk about, but sometimes they do.
Do you find that people actually if you just say, "How can I help?" Do you find that people just begin to spill the beans, or do you have some of those people that are going to be a little bit more guarded? And then how do you get past that, especially when you're trying to build that connection with a coworker, as an example?
Right, right. Well, one of the things that I do is, again, this is I'm lucky have because I have had a pretty long career doing multiple things. I've worked in investment banking. I've worked in private equity. I've been a consultant, and I've kind of heard all the stories. There's a phrase that I really like. Where somebody it comes from a movie, but it's like, yeah, they're all alike, only this one is more so, or it it's just they all have their own situation. Actually, one of my old bosses, who is a great mentor of mine and a great friend, he said one time we were going into a meeting, and I asked him a question. He goes, yeah, they all wait a minute, I want to make sure I say this. Every one of them is different, and they all look like this. You start to see the same patterns and things. So what I do is I listen to what their situation is, what their family situation is, how long have they been in the business. It's different if there's somebody that inherited the business from their dad or their mom or something, or a parent, or did they start it from scratch. Those are different mindsets. Also, do you have sometimes I'll work with people who want to pass the business on to the next generation. My
Hmm.
son, my daughter, whatever, has been working in the business since they graduated from college. And, I would like that to groom them to one day take over. Or some of them just say, I want to sell my business. So there's a lot of different things. But, you get to, well, you're telling me tactically what you want, but let's think more strategically, more broadly. What do you want? There are people, and I work with a lot of clients that the last thing they want is to sell their business. They love the business. They love coming in every day, but it's a pretty wide range. And then there are people who just say, I have to get out of this business now. I'm for whatever
Done
reason.
for whatever reason. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually my one of my least favorite things to hear, because it usually means that the person hasn't thought too much about how to prepare their business and their own psyche for not owning that business anymore. That's a big deal.
Right. So yeah, they haven't gone through that process of setting up a legitimate exit strategy. How they're going to manage it? What's the process?
Well,
What's the effect after I get rid of the business? Yeah.
yeah, you talk to a lot of people, and they have what I call the if I don't do it, it doesn't get done syndrome. The people that they're the boss and they make every decision, and okay, now I want to sell my business. Well, if you were to walk in and buy the business, you've got a group of employees that have never made a decision because they've never had to, or they've never been told to. And so, you know, what is it that I'm walking into here? Then you've got companies that where the owner is sort of well, we're doing it. This is the way we do it because this is the way we've always done it, and that doesn't always work. I mean, the world the world
No.
changes pretty rapidly, and the past, as they say, is prelude. But one of the analogies, or the imageries that I use with my clients sometimes is, look, if the road in front of you looks just like the road behind you, you're fine. Okay. So try this on for size. Next time you're driving down the highway, drive while you're looking in the rear view mirror, not through the windshield. if the road in front of you is straight as an arrow, like the road behind you, you're fine. But as soon as there's a twist, a turn, a dip, a global pandemic, a tree, whatever in the road, you're going to have a problem. So next time you're driving down the highway, try that experiment. Tell me how long it takes before you get really uncomfortable.
I think that would be a split second, right? Depending on how
Yeah.
fast you're driving. But yeah, it makes me think of, several years ago, I was running the company, and they brought me in to run this company, and it was really it was an interesting experience, I should say, where immediately once I get in there, it was everybody had been trained, as you were talking about, to by the owners to do whatever they were told. And my attitude always was, you go back to that old biblical teach a man to fish, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I just still remember for weeks, it seemed like I had this line of people at my door in my office to ask me a question of how they could do something. And I finally just had to throw my hands up, and I'm like, all right, I don't have a problem with questions. But if you have a question, you need to come to me with 3 solutions. And then let's talk about those solutions to figure that out. And over the next few months, all of a sudden, I didn't have the light at my door anymore. But for the first little bit, it was crazy how much time I was spending asking the basic questions, and I think if we train our people, no matter what level in an organization you are, whether if you train your people to do that, well, then it lifts everybody up, and you can actually accomplish so much more. Because if you rely on the one guy, he goes on vacation, everybody doesn't do it.
Yeah. Well, I think it was Steve Jobs. I may be wrong. So if I am, correct me. But Steve Jobs, I think, said, I hired smart people and I let them do their jobs.
Right.
And, you know, that's if you think about it, that's having firing on all cylinders. That's really getting generating value. Companies companies can often sort of, I guess you'd call it morphing, because it's a slow process, but they can go from being what I call a producer of value to a consumer of value. In other
Hmm.
words, here they're growing value and here they're shrinking value. And it's hard to know where that tide turns. But I have a lot of clients that have been in the same business for 30 years, and they're not growing anymore, but there is value there because they're at least innovating. Okay, they're at least changing the way they do things, and
Right.
that's hey, look, it keeps people employed. I have one client that has he calls it a no layoff policy,
Okay.
and this was through the pandemic as well. And he kept people employed. Yeah, they had to shut their doors, during the, what do you call it, uh, the closing your doors period where that we all had.
When we were kind of quarantined.
Yeah, quarantine period. But when that was over, everybody came back to work, and their jobs were waiting for them. And even though some of them, I got to know this company very well, and I got to know some of the employees. I think some of them you might wish had gone somewhere else, but that's okay. That's okay. We all have that.
Yes. Yeah. So how do you translate that? I mean, you've done a lot of work with that, with the upper management and owners and things like that. How does the average guy, how do they translate what some of the things that you're talking about into working in the areas that they've got, not just from that higher level, but average guy at a company?
Well, you have to kind of, your yardstick, or your your scorecard should
Hmm.
be, what am I alluded to this a minute ago. Am I creating value? Am I consuming value? How do I create value? And I think even bigger, where am I going? And the only way you know where you're going from a value perspective is, first you have to know where you are. And
Right.
that's one of the first things I do with people. We need to figure out the value of your company. And That's not a theoretical value that, there's a term, fair market value. You've probably
Hmm.
heard it, but the definition of
Right.
that is a willing buyer, willing seller, with each of them has all the relevant facts, knows you know, all the information, and neither is under adverse compulsion to act. In 35 years, I have never seen a transaction that had those things going on. There's always a reason, there's always an asymmetry of information. So we need to talk about what a real buyer would pay for this company. So we sit down and we talk about it. And it's really, value is a function of two things. How much cash will this business generate going forward, not backward, forward? And what is the risk associated with generating that cash flow? And sometimes that's a hard thing to understand, because if you think about value in a transaction, if I buy your company, I don't own it yesterday, I own it tomorrow. That's what I care about. I
Hmm.
care about everything going forward. If you remember 10th grade geometry class, it's a ray. A ray is a line that starts at a point and moves out to probably infinity. I don't know. But that's the way you need to think about it. It's not a continuous line. It's starting that, well, maybe even
Starting
that way.
today, this is where I am. Yeah.
Yeah, right. From this day forward, as they say. Yeah. So getting people to think that way is step number one. Okay. Now we've established what your value is. And in order to do that, we have identified value drivers, things that you do that drive value. And we also need to uncover places where there are risks that you may not be familiar with, understand, or even knowledgeable of. Things like, okay, yeah, I'll give you a good example. A long time ago, I worked with a company it was a packaging company, and they made, if you if you go to the supermarket and you buy baked goods, for example,
Hmm.
they've got that cellophane window in it. It's a
Right.
pretty cool machine that makes those, by the way. It's
Those
got,
are, yeah. I'm in the manufacturing industry,
yeah.
so I around
So,
that. So yeah,
so
those are cool.
So they make that, and they make some other,
Hmm.
food related items. And I got a call from the CFO one day, and she said, "Great news! I won't mention names, but we'll just call them Stuff Mart.
Okay.
A very large retailer. And great news! We just got a contract with Stuff Mart." I said, "Okay, that's great, but we should talk about what that means in terms of the value of the company." "What do you mean? It's gonna triple, quadruple, the size of the company."
Right.
"Well, maybe, maybe not." For example, one of the things that was required in this contract was, uh, the customer, which was, by the way, paying a lower price than all the other customers, so the margins were lower on this behemoth
Mhm. Yeah.
piece of business. But they would also, make some pretty draconian requests, like, or really demands, like, you need to keep 6 months worth of inventory on hand at all times, and we're going to check on it. And if you don't, there are penalties and bad things happen. So what happens is, now this company has to invest in inventory that it may not sell for 6, 7, 8 months, but it's got to have it sitting around. So that threw working capital into a tizzy, and yeah, the company's not there anymore. That it's unfortunate. There are a number of other things. I mean, it wasn't just this, but it
But
put a lot
that's
of
part of it, I
put a
mean, you
lot
gotta
of
take into
pressure
account. Yeah.
on
Yeah.
on the day to day. Yeah, but those were cool
Yeah,
machines,
definitely.
though.
No, they are. Some of those packaging machines are just crazy. So, and I'm thinking, as as we talk, and you're you're obviously talking at that really higher level, and I'm looking at that. You've got the worker. I'm looking at it as the company value, but the worker value, the value driver for the worker. What are they bringing to that, as well as the worker has risks as well. So if I'm going to extend myself out there as just the everyday guy that I'm working on the packaging line at this particular company, if I'm going to extend myself out there and try and increase my value, what are the risks that I have? And I see that as really, you just don't know. There's so many players inside of a company.
Yeah,
You want to make sure that you
there's a
marry
whole
yourself with the right one. Yeah.
yeah, there's a whole lot of, call it research, coursework, literature, whatever, around competitive strategies as well. You know,
Yes. Yeah.
in the case of our packaging friends, you know, they had very little power vis-a-vis their big customer.
Right.
Sometimes you have companies that have very little power vis-a-vis their suppliers, and
Right.
or there's other things like how easily can someone tomorrow turn a switch and start a business just like yours across the street. That's barriers to entry. Or if I am a consumer of your company's product, how easily can I switch to somebody else's, Coke and Pepsi kind of thing? So those are switching costs. So there's a lot of dynamics involved. And one of my stops along the way, I used to be an economist, and so economists, yeah, they make a lot of weird assumptions, but they also you learn to think big picture about things. So when I analyze a business, for example, I doesn't matter whether I'm doing it top down or bottom up. The three parts are important. We'll start with the company. I really need to understand the company, what makes it tick. And as I said, what are the value drivers and what are the potential risks? Then I need to understand the industry dynamics. Like I said before, the competition and the relative strength and bargaining power of all the players involved. And then, overlaid upon that is the economy itself. There are,
What's
when
the
interest
market
rates
saying?
are high,
Yeah.
people don't invest in equipment. So if you're making widget pounding equipment or something like that, it's working against you, don't scratch your head and wonder why, your customers aren't plunking down, you know, millions of dollars for your equipment. It's a cost
Yeah,
straight through the
exactly.
cost of money.
Exactly. You're exactly right there. And Tony, I just want to make sure you know that we're obviously we keep our episodes short and we're coming up to that time period, but I want to make sure that you know how much I appreciate it. And I'm
Oh, this has
trying
been a
to,
blast.
as we go through and tie all this stuff together, right? To for the average guy to be able to understand the that career side of things and what they can do. And so I'm gonna wrap up. We're gonna wrap up today with the with our one question that we ask every guest. And so, what is one thing our listeners can do today to build deeper connections with those around them, based off of our conversation?
Well, there is one thing that I do, and
Okay.
I tell people this: get in touch with somebody you haven't been in touch with for a long time. High school friend,
Hmm.
somebody, former colleague, something. Just make that a habit to keep in touch with people. I'm not talking about you know weird things like your old girlfriends and stuff, unless you want to. But just the people the people that have been in your life in whatever way, shape, or form have influenced who you are, and it's good to
Right.
reconnect with that. So that's my piece of advice. That's my thing you can do. you know
Yeah. Yeah. I so appreciate you sharing that. I mean, I actually had an experience earlier today with talking with somebody on the phone that I hadn't talked to in a long time. And so and we were talking actually her husband was a boss of mine many years ago. And I just found out he'd passed away. So she and I had a chance to visit a little bit. I felt really grateful that we could talk and share some of those old stories and things like that. So,
Yeah.
well,
It
Tony,
it
thank
it
you so
it
much.
brings
Oh, go
it
ahead.
brings dividends in ways you can't imagine. It really does.
Right. It
I've
really
always
does.
found that.
So we sure appreciate you coming on and spending just a few minutes with us today. For those of you that have stuck with us through the end here, thank you very much. We would ask that you just kind of hit that like, subscribe, those things that we do that podcasters say all the time. And if if this message hits home to you, please make sure that you share it with those men that really, really need to hear the good messages and the messages that we're pushing out on Knee to Knee. So thank you again, Tony, for coming. And thank you, everybody. And we will catch you on the next go around. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.